Good morning and welcome to this edition of Tennessee Concrete Conversations, a podcast sponsored by the Tennessee Concrete Association. My name is Alan Sparkman and my guest today is Amanda Ahult with the National Ready Mix Concrete Association. Amanda, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Thanks, Alan, for the opportunity to come in this morning and talk to you. Like Alan said, my name is Amanda Ahult, and I am the Senior Director of Local Paving for the National Ready Mix Concrete Association. I'm located out of Jacksonville, Florida, and I cover the Southeast United States.
So you've been with NRMCA, I think, 11 years
Yes,
now.
11 years in August.
And what you do every day is talk primarily about pavements, often concrete parking lots for commercial work. Sometimes maybe a little bit of streets, and you are an amazing resource for the industry on both the design side, how to design pavements correctly and competitively, and also on the marketing side. So tell me where you see the biggest opportunities for both for ready-mix concrete producers and for concrete contractors. How can they get into and get their piece of the concrete pie in the parking lot market?
I think our biggest thing that we need to focus on is not going out and spending too much energy looking for those opportunities. The one thing that we can do is the projects that you already have, from a producer standpoint, and even a contractor standpoint. You've got a project and you're bidding on the internal slab or the foundation work. Look at your parking lot, whether it be a small commercial parking lot or a large industrial. We see specifically on the industrial side, we can have a good amount of concrete on it through the heavy duty sections, but that employee parking lot is more than likely a different paving material, probably asphalt. And so that's a great opportunity to look at that and say, hey, this is more market share for me. I'm already on the job. And give NRMCA a call if you're looking for assistance in that regard. From a producer or a contractor standpoint, give us a call, send us an email, and let us do a design recommendation for you to go into bid with and see if you can grow your pie with very little effort on your part.
I think that's a great point. When we try to talk about substituting concrete for other building materials in a building, that takes a lot more work, and we have to be involved in that process early in the design life, which is difficult. It can be done, and I think the industry, NRMCA, has certainly got a great team of building professionals who are promoting that. We do some of that work here at TCA, but it is more difficult. Almost every commercial project, every industrial project will have a parking lot. And while it's better, I would say, to get involved early, you can flip that late in the project. So I think that's a great suggestion. If you're the concrete contractor or the ready-mix producer, you should be proposing a concrete parking lot alternative on every project
Absolutely.
that you're supplying. And as you mentioned, NRMCA provides really good support for that. And I think surprisingly, it's a secret to a lot of people in the industry, even though it's not new. But your team will do a competitive design for a parking lot that, again, the ready-mix producer or the contractor can take back to the owner. And it's a very professional proposal, and it's a true design. It's not a cut and paste.
Correct.
So it's a huge advantage. And even you're not going to maybe bat 1,000. You won't get every parking lot. But I think that presentation ups your credibility in the eye
Absolutely.
of that design team, and it probably positions you much better for the next projects that you do with them.
And that's really what these are intended to be. They're an educational piece of material that whoever we're working with, the contractor, the producer, that they can take to the designer that maybe the engineer of record or the owner, and they can show them a very thorough recommendation. This is how we came up with this concrete design. And that's really what this is used for. And it can be used in many different ways. If the project you're working on does not have concrete at all, then we can use this as a way to introduce a concrete section to the project, and then put a number to it when it comes to bidding. If there is a concrete design already on there, but we know that we're going to have to compete with asphalt in initial cost, it's a great opportunity for us to look at it and see, are we really bidding apples to apples? And a lot of designers believe in their heart that they are. But when we look at the structural makeup of those two sections, we really aren't. I remember one of my first projects was probably a 6 to 8 inch thick concrete section over 8 inches of an aggregate base, with about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of asphalt over 8 inches of a granular material. When you look at those two, there's no way that we can be competitive on an initial cost. And so those are projects that we like to educate and arm the rest of our army, being the producers and the contractors, so that when they see something like that, an over design, one that won't be competitive in initial costs, they can give us a call and we can help them out, and give them something that's, I hate using the term value engineering, because a lot of folks take that as we're going to cheapen up the material, and concrete will never be a cheap material. The value of concrete far exceeds other paving materials, but we need to get just what's required. And we do that using the appropriate design guides. For parking lots, we use ACI 330. For pervious, the 522. And then for our local streets and roads, we use the ACI 325. We also have other documents out there available for paving. Trails, concrete trails are another big opportunity that we're seeing. And so we also have those guides out there. And then the last thing is overlays, concrete overlays. The CP Tech Center out of Iowa they have a lot of great resources on their website. We have them on our paveahead.com website as well, that you can use if you've got an asphalt parking lot or even a concrete parking lot that needs some repair. We can go in and put a thin layer of concrete on top of those and really bring your pavement to life and give it an extended design life.
And I think there's a really important point there, that I see this all the time in my conversation with designers, architects. There is this today huge misconception that concrete is way more expensive than asphalt. And, if you go back 20 years, that was true. But today, what a lot of people don't realize, one way to do it is to talk about the cost per ton of material. In the concrete world, we talk about the cost per cubic yard. Well, that's 2 tons. And if you look at the cost for a ton of asphalt versus the cost for a ton of concrete, that's often a pretty dramatic way to help owners, less sophisticated people, new designers, to help them understand that concrete's really competitive. Because on a ton per ton basis today, I think anywhere in the U.S., concrete costs less per ton. That's step number one. Step number two is the strength of the materials, asphalt and concrete, per inch, which, the shorthand way to capture that is structural numbers. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a back of the napkin design approach. And the ACI 330 is more rigorous than that. Mm-hmm. But if you're talking to non-designers, you can establish that concrete costs less per ton, and that inch for inch concrete's a stronger paving material. So in your example, 8 inches of concrete versus 1.5 inches of asphalt, a non-engineer can see that that's not equal.
Right.
That's not equivalent. So if we can get equivalent designs today, concrete is first cost competitive. And I'm amazed when I talk to people that they still think that that's just can't be true.
Right. And a lot of times it's because the design is so out of whack. When you look at ACI 330 designs for parking lots, a standard parking lot for any light to medium duty, depending on your traffic and soils, can be in the 5 and even 4.5 inch thick range. But whenever I talk to designers and I mention that, and we even run through a little example, their eyes get kind of, they get big. They start shaking their head no, because their standard is no less than 6 inches. And it's at that point I like to kind of go backwards and say, okay, if you're going to do a 6-inch thick design, with a basic soils, that gets you, 25, 50 semi trucks per day. Is that really what your doctor's office parking lot is going to see? And, they come to the realization that's not true. And so, thickness is one way that we can look at trying to combat that initial cost discrepancy. The other is looking at, if you're putting dowels in your pavement, you have a light and medium duty concrete pavement, dowels are not necessary in many, many instances. With the new release of ACI 330 documents, the one that just was produced in 2021 for light and medium duty, it does not have dowels. It says if you need dowels, you need to go to the industrial document. So that kind of puts it in perspective of, do I need dowels? If you're questioning if you need dowels, if you're not designing a more industrial document, you really probably don't need dowels. And the other is the welded wire mesh, and ACI 330 goes into detail about the welded wire mesh. You talk to contractors, you talk to producers, and you talk about cutting up a section of concrete with welded wire mesh, and you say, well, where is it typically located? Even a good contractor will laugh and say it's at the bottom of the concrete or in the subgrade. And ACI, when they distinctly talk about where it needs to be placed in order to be effective. And I can tell you, in the bottom of the concrete and the subgrade is not going to help. So there's a lot of things that we can do to the concrete design beyond thickness to really get that initial delta, but down to where concrete is extremely competitive on a first cost. And then we all know when you get a good concrete design and get it placed well, then your life cycle, we absolutely hit it out of the park in that regard.
Yeah, and the other thing about cost, when you talk to owners, there's the first cost, which is unfortunately where a lot of the focus often goes. Mm-hmm. But the good news for concrete folks today is we can be competitive first cost with pavements.
Absolutely.
We sometimes have to educate on design like you've been talking about, but that's very doable. And the relative cost of concrete versus asphalt has worked in our favor. And so I think we have first cost competitiveness on pretty much every project.
Right. Agreed.
And especially if we get a reasonable design and we take dowels out of 4-inch pavement, which is insane, we can be really competitive. But then the conversation shifts to the cost of ownership, which has always been hugely in concrete's favor. And I've never had anybody argue that with me.
Correct.
Everybody would say, yes, I wish I could afford concrete. Well, good news, you can.
Right.
But then you talk about the cost of ownership. Talk a little bit about the advantages, not just in the maintenance of the pavement, but what other advantages does concrete bring to an owner in terms of reducing their operational cost?
Well, like Alan, like you just mentioned, just with standard maintenance, that alone is a big ticket item when we start looking at the life cycle cost analysis of the concrete pavements. Again, good concrete pavements can go in and really see very little to no maintenance over its lifespan. But beyond just that cost, we do see, because of the concrete's high reflectivity, we see a couple of saving opportunities for the owner. So that's really, what is an owner going to see in his pocket? And a couple of those is the opportunity, because of the high reflectivity, is to see a reduced amount of light poles in the parking lot, and also reducing the wattage of the light bulbs that are being used. Both of those are a very large, when you look at, some of these parking lots can be quite large, and how many light poles that they could potentially reduce on their site. The other one is their HVAC system. I always use the example of getting out of a car growing up in Florida, going to a gas station, and we didn't, at that time we didn't have to wear shoes. So you'd get out of the parking lot, and it was when I would step on the asphalt, it would literally sizzle my feet. And that's the heat absorption that the darker pavements experience. So with concrete, with it being reflective, it's not only reflecting the light, but also the heat. And so the air around your building will be less than with concrete than what it would be with asphalt. And we see this every day if you watch your local news and they talk about the weather, and you can see in downtown areas that the temperature recording in those areas where it's mostly paved is going to be higher than those of the surrounding more rural areas. So running your HVAC system, cooler air surrounding your building, your HVAC system does not need to work as much as it would with the darker pavements that are absorbing the heat. So those are just a couple, immediate dollar figures that the owner will feel. But we know with concrete, there's other benefits with it, just the safety aspect, as one that travels alone a lot. Just the amount of the brightness of the concrete paving and what it does, gas stations, going to gas stations alone at night. I typically will even pay a few pennies more if I can go to one where I feel safer, pumping gas. You look at hospitals, any place that's going to be used at night, you want the people that are going to be using that facility, as well as one that will be using the facility, to feel safer with that reflectivity of the concrete.
Amanda, those are great points, and they illustrate that concrete brings value on the front end. Today, concrete is first cost competitive, and it just provides benefits to the owners and the users of the parking lot throughout the parking lot's life. The other thing that touches on that's a big deal in many projects today is sustainability. And you mentioned the big difference in heat between concrete and asphalt. And the reason that urban areas typically are hotter, and this is documented by a wealth of research from NASA and other folks, but one big reason we see that urban heat island effect is dark pavements and dark roofs. And, it can be about a 30% difference. So I know Nashville has an initiative to try to reduce urban heat and to increase resilience. And literally one of the simplest things they could do would be to use concrete pavements. And so they could do that today at a similar first cost. They would get the benefit of that better lighting, safety at night, and they would make a huge difference in just the air temperature in urban areas.
Agreed.
So that brings us to a close for this edition of Tennessee Concrete Conversations, a great conversation about concrete parking lots and the advantages that concrete brings there. Amanda's contact information can be found at the end of this podcast. And also, you can always contact me at Tennessee Concrete Association, and we're happy to put you in contact with Amanda to get her expertise and put it to work on your next project.